the Apple Car project was, they called it the worst kept secret in the world.
Apple very rarely cancels big name projects, if ever.
Are cars slowly becoming a part of the Internet of Things?
No, because I think that term of Internet of Things is slowly going away. Generative AI can't tell the difference between fact and fiction. It simply just scans the data that it has available and then spits it out.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
And we have a new friend.
Hi, I'm Shrivaas and I'm back finally on the podcast.
Hey, Shrivaas.
You were gone for a while.
I was gone for a while.
Got you back.
Yeah.
Well,
Glad to have you back.
Likewise, nice to see you again, Jim.
You as well.
now, a couple of things have happened since we met last time.
Big things.
So, right?
Big things.
Are we talking about the same thing?
I think we got to talk about a few things that have happened. First off, we beat your team pretty convincingly, and I might say this: I predicted it too. You even asked for my prediction in the last podcast, and I was correct. And not only that, we won the whole thing. So go blue! All right.
Well, since you're a Michigan fan, this was kind of what I expected. You would have probably even said that if you guys had lost. So.
This is true. This is true. Now, what's really funny, and one of the things you guys might not know, is that in the last week, one of your coaches decided to quit Ohio State and come to us. It was a very big deal. Oh yeah, it's a very big deal. But anyway, have to rub it in. So
I would know nothing about this as I'm dressed in the most neutral color you can find.
Well, he probably switched teams so he could kind of irritate it, and then we're gonna win next year.
It's gonna be a heck of a game, that's for sure. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that happened since you were in the podcast last time. What can I say? It's been a hard time for OSU fans.
It's very true,
but it might get better. So the second thing was Shrivaas joined again, and then of all of those hard-hitting issues, the two that I named already. Apple also quit or canceled their car project. And now I don't know which one of those three is the worst. But I'm guessing it's probably for most people, the Apple car.
What's funny is that I actually love the fact that they canceled it. I could not be more ecstatic. I thought it was wonderful that they canceled it because it just proves that making cars is really difficult.
It really begs the question: how so many Chinese OEMs come up and disappear every single day?
Well said. Yep, exactly. So,
yeah, I heard that the Apple Car project they called it the worst kept secret in the world.
Yeah.
So you kind of know something's going on, but they never publicly admitted to it. But someone was always working in the background. Now, you've probably been following this since it started, maybe 2014.
Oh yeah.
And we talked I think it was the day it got canceled. We had this quick chat, and you said, "Well, I'm not really. I'm a little surprised, but also not really surprised. Now that a lot of the things have been spoken about, and now that more information has come out, are you still surprised that it happened, or did you say, well, it had to happen that way?"
I'm surprised by how many people agree with me, actually. I am surprised by how many journalists are they're not surprised at all that it got canceled. I think everybody who's outside of the automotive industry is kind of shocked that it did because Apple very rarely cancels big name projects, if ever, at least to this scale. But one of the things that surprised me the most is how many journalists were not surprised at all that they canceled it. And that's been a kind of a surreal moment because it kind of was a way to see Apple vulnerable. And everybody kind of saw it coming who was really close to it. And for me, looking back on it, I have to admit I'm like 70-30. I'm like 30% sad because I'm a huge Apple product user. I love their products a lot. And now that I'm not working for a major automotive company anymore, I selfishly would have loved to see what they came out with. But I also knew too that anytime when they come out with a product, they do a very good job and they typically dominate the market and kind of cause a natural monopoly within that kind of area, like Apple Watch, for example, is the last one I could think of. And so I was afraid the same thing was going to happen with the car, but it didn't. It didn't at all. They canceled it, and now there's hundreds of employers making cars and hundreds of different tech startups around the industry as well. And so it's very much like the exact opposite of a monopoly right now, which is what I'm a fan of.
So did you think that Apple kind of overestimated themselves, by thinking they could just eviscerate other competitors since they had done the same thing with the phone industry, sort of? They kind of got in over their head?
I think they didn't necessarily get over their head. They had too many captains behind the wheel. And I think based on what I've read, based on what I've heard, they pivoted too many times in their overall strategy. Do we go all in on a fully autonomous vehicle that's level 4, level 5 autonomy with no steering wheel? Okay, let's completely turn the boat 180. Let's make an affordable EV that kind of is around the $40,000-$50,000 range with basic kind of driver assist features. Okay, well, maybe let's go into a performance car. And so whenever time you pivot, they had some layoffs, they had changes in leadership. And so they kind of lost money every major decision. And so I don't think they necessarily got over their head, because they're the most, if they're one of, if not the most richest company or highest valued company in the world. So I don't think cash was really a huge issue, as a lot of people think it is. But I think it was the fact that they could never get aligned in the strategy. And so Tim Cook basically, I'm sure, just said, you know what, guys, we can't just stop. We can't just keep on making these decisions. We have to just kill it because we can't get aligned. And I think they just said enough was enough. So that's what I think happened.
At some point, I believe Tim Cook also offered to buy Tesla.
Tim Cook. Oh, you're saying? Oh, he was offered to buy it, wasn't he?
He offered to buy Tesla at some point. I'm not a spokesperson for Apple, just to make that clear for legal reasons. But
no, he was.
I really wonder what would have happened if Apple had taken over Tesla. I think there's a few examples of Apple taking over brands and making them a lot more successful than they were. Like Beats is one example. They bought a bunch of stuff. It really makes me question what would have happened if that had happened. Maybe we won't see all the FSD issues that we're seeing today. I don't know, but I'm genuinely curious. What do you think?
I think if Apple eventually bought Tesla, I think what would have happened was Elon Musk wouldn't have been the figure that we see him now. I think he would have pivoted into SpaceX and done that, and I don't think he would have been as rich as he is now. That's one thing I think would have happened. The other thing that I think would have happened is Tesla would have not taken as many risks. The Cybertruck, for example, would never have happened if Tesla was bought up by Apple. That product would have never seen the light of day. And I think we also would have seen, I think, a slightly better version of the Model 3 that I think was maybe a little bit more expensive, a little more safer. They wouldn't have used terms like full self-driving or, things like that. But I don't think it would have been as divisive as it is now. I think what's absolutely fascinating, though, is that you have, I'll call it pivot for a second. I was at a talk last night with Mary Barra, actually. She was speaking along with one of her journalist friends. And they were mentioning how we love personalities behind our CEOs. And I think that if Apple went ahead and bought Tesla, it wouldn't have been as successful as it is now, because people love to gather around opinionated CEOs. And I think that's, a lot of people view Elon that way. And it's always kind of fun to think of what ifs, but I think Tesla would not look anything like it is now if it got bought up by Tesla. I don't think it would have been as successful either. So, yeah.
Well, that's a very interesting take. But I think we can delve a little bit into what this means for Apple as well, canceling the Apple Car. I think there's two ways of looking at it, right? On one hand, they save money to develop AI. Maybe they were in too much over their heads. Maybe they underestimated what it takes. But on the other hand, this could mean that this could be the beginning of a new chapter for software-defined vehicles. Because if you remember, at some point, Apple announced the new Apple CarPlay, which covers all the displays, let's say. And at some point in time in this podcast, we had a chat with Casper from Snap Automotive, who spoke about how it's really not that easy to access specific vehicle data. Like like driving data, for example, for companies like Apple or Google with Android, and how they're limited in their functionality. But this could mean that maybe Apple saw some potential with this. So, given the number of users that are using iPhones, and given that CarPlay is something that runs on your iPhone and not your infotainment system, do you think maybe this could be the move they're going for, where they did some research on the software and they're like, maybe we could hit the nail on the head with this one?
I think they're definitely putting in a little bit more into Apple CarPlay, but not much more. I think it actually will surprise you as to how little they're adding more to the Apple CarPlay team. I don't know the exact figures, but what I've heard and what I read in the New York Times, they had a great piece. They got published after the Apple canceled the project. They're laying off people, and then they're diverting pretty much everybody else to AI. And so what that tells me is that they're having trouble getting partners for their new Apple CarPlay system. Porsche is one of the first ones out the gate, as well as Aston Martin. And what's interesting about the Porsche agreement is that they did not include the 911. And so what that tells me is that their very opinionated customer base does not want to feel like they're driving an Apple product. They want to drive a Porsche. They do not want to drive an Apple product. And so I think what's also happening too is that car companies are getting better at SDV across the board. Everybody is, even the laggers are getting better. And they want their own data. And so I actually think that Apple is being very cautious about Apple CarPlay. I don't think that I think that they're definitely putting in, continuing to put in resources because they know how cool Apple CarPlay is. But I think that they're struggling trying to find unified partners, and they're picking and choosing the models, not even whole brands, just specific models to incorporate this interaction. Because people want to drive that brand. People want to drive a Mercedes-Benz. They do not want to drive an Apple car when they buy a Mercedes.
That's true.
So
that's true.
But people love having Apple products in their car. Everyone uses Apple CarPlay, but they don't want a system based on Apple CarPlay, I guess.
Yeah.
They want the apps. They want the
apps, but they don't want the whole thing. Okay.
Correct. They want to be able to use Google Maps. They want to be able to use Spotify. They want to be Lyft and Uber drivers want to be able to have their apps built into the dash. They don't want to have to plug in a phone and go through a phone system.
So they want to pick the best of both worlds then.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Drivers overwhelmingly, if they have a specific use for it, they want to have it built in the car. They don't want to have to plug in anything extra. And so I think what's happening, especially with companies like Spotify, they're like, hey, Apple, you guys created a great experience for us through Apple CarPlay. We get it, but you're not penetrating the companies the way we want to. We want to be inside more cars. And so they're doing a fantastic job going at different companies like Rivian, like Tesla, that they're building in their apps within those cars. And that way Spotify has access to their data. Tesla and Rivian have access to their data, and it's kind of a win-win for both. And they're, leaving Apple and Google out of it completely. And so I think you're going to see more and more companies like that. I think Google is going to start doing that too, where their native Google Maps system is probably going to be also available in, with companies like Tesla and Rivian, where people are just going to prefer that one app, and then they don't want anything else.
Now, you mentioned that we have this one car in the database. It's the Ito M7, right?
M5. M7, M5, same thing, same company.
Same.
Yeah.
But this car is entirely based on the Huawei system.
Harmony OS.
Yeah, but the software that was created by Huawei.
Yeah.
Now, what's the difference? Because that car relies on that system, and people seem to accept it. Now, what's the difference between that and people having the same thing with an iOS system? Is this a different type of target group, or?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on, I think it is a different target group. A company like that, they just happen to make great apps that are also usable as well. They also not in North America. So, it's hard for me to say kind of what, I've never driven one. I've only studied it through your guys' through articles and through what you guys have published a little bit. And as far as I can tell, they just do a great job on their own. And their system works really, really well. And so because their customer base is mainly the Asian market, customers aren't conditioned as much to use Google products or Apple products, because obviously Google is not in China. So it's kind of one of those things where users don't have that pre-mental model going into using that product, or the expectation that it should work well as Google, because I never had Google to begin with. And so, as Germans, as Americans, we're conditioned to use Google products, and so we expect that same way to work in the car. But the Chinese market doesn't have that. And so I think that's also why they're seeing a lot of success there.
I think this brings a very important topic into the question, and probably we can start to go in that a bit deeper. The Xiaomi car. What I find common between both these vehicles or both these brands is that Huawei's Harmony OS, actually, most people ridicule Huawei for being Chinese. If you go and look into their Harmony OS implementation, it's impressive, and it's very impressive at that. The way the phones, the laptops, the fridge, the cooker, whatever.
Not surprised.
Yeah, it works so well together. And Xiaomi has now announced a new car. They have a history of copying a lot of things that Apple does, and this seems to be another one. And
there's a pattern.
Unlike Apple, they actually have a car on the road, not in the market yet. I mean, they have, I think, one car that is really going to be produced first, and then they made a bunch of lofty claims with the others, with the V8, as they call their motor, and so on. And they
even though it's not an ICE vehicle at all.
I know, right? That is very tacky, and that is very much, I would say, the way of attracting attention for that user group. I guess. But also, they announced that they're going to be using HyperOS on their HMI, which is the same name as the software they use on their phone. And so far, I have not seen Xiaomi do as much of an integration between various devices as Huawei has done. But this is really, to me, like a compass pointing in a direction and saying that maybe there is something to this.
So for those who don't know, because we're probably talking about brands that many people have never even heard of.
True.
So how would you describe these brands? Just like what comes to mind as a good comparison when you're saying these brands? Obviously, these are Chinese brands. They don't sell in Europe. They don't sell in North America. So how would you describe them?
I would say both of them are pioneers in the smartphone industry. I think of late they've started selling quite well in Germany. We have a bunch of Huawei laptops in the office, ironically.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know. Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, they've been around of late. They're smartphone companies. Huawei didn't just begin with smartphones. They were doing more networking stuff and so on. Xiaomi used to make custom ROMs for Android phones, and then they ventured into smartphones. They became really popular. Then they ventured into other things, like anything anyone does, they just take their shot at it and make their own version, which, to be fair, is really good. If you get a vacuum cleaner from Xiaomi, it's going to be really good. Although mentally you associate Xiaomi with a smartphone, or Huawei with a smartphone or a laptop, everything that they make almost is really good. So that's how I would describe them. Primarily smartphone first companies, tech first companies that have now newly ventured into cars.
It's a good comparison that I could think of for people who are used to American products would be like LG and then also Samsung. LG and Samsung both make appliances in America. So they make refrigerators, washer and dryers. Obviously, they led first with cell phones here in the States. And then it'd be like Samsung or LG also like making a car. Yep.
I think, if I'm not wrong, Samsung even makes military equipment in South Korea. So
they do. Yep, absolutely.
But what do you think of? Let's first, before we delve deeper into this topic, let's just touch a bit on the Xiaomi car, right? So what was your impression when Xiaomi announced that they were making a car and actually put a car out there? I mean, the car has been ridiculed for its design, because they say it's a poor man's Taycan, but at the same time,
it only took them 3 years.
Only took them 3 years, yeah.
So the Chinese have mastered, and they've taken a page out of I would say Henry Ford's book, and they're very good at manufacturing. They are, in my mind, I think the global leader in manufacturing. And so the biggest hurdle that companies like Apple, for example, are facing is manufacturing. How do we conquer that? And I think the Chinese, because we've relied on them for so long, everything in the United States, I feel like, is made in China. They know how to produce something very, very quickly. And so my guess is that it's going to be a great car in China. A lot of people have already used their products, and so they'll be able to use the car very easily. But it'll have incredibly a hard time selling abroad, particularly in North America, because customers would have never heard of the brand. They have no idea what expectations are. It's going to be hit with tariffs no matter what. And it's going to be interesting in the durability of it. That would be my question. Is how's the durability stack up? Even for like a kind of a small crossover vehicle, that what I would the best way I'd describe that is like a kind of like a lengthier, smaller crossover, kind of sporty crossover. Is this durability? But that's the question for any new brand that makes a car. You know, when Rivian first came out, there was tons of durability issues and manufacturing defects that were actually in the body of the vehicle that came out. And so that'd be my first question. The second question is software and scalability of the software. So obviously, the three of us, we're experts in SDV and software-defined vehicles and the software that's inside of them. But what's interesting about that company and that vehicle is that it's a software that very few people, I would say where I'm from at least, don't know how to use. We have no preconditions how to use. You guys are, I would say, definitely ahead of us, but the learning curve is incredibly high. And so when China's trying to get into the next big market, they're going to face not only a brand that nobody's heard of, but a software that nobody knows how to use because we have not been preconditioned the way the rest of the world has with their products. So it'll be interesting to see. Now, what's really fascinating from my perspective is that when I talk to my Chinese students about it, 30% of my class, of roughly about 60 people, are Chinese. They're really excited. They have their cell phones, they have their products, and they're just like, "Yep, this was predicted. We saw this coming, and yet this is just we're surprised they haven't made it into North America yet." So, yeah, that's kind of my reaction, at least, is that the durability, and then also the how users can learn their software would be my two big questions. So yeah.
I think one big advantage that Xiaomi has or had is that they benefited from a partnership with the Beijing Automotive Group. So that kind of allowed them quick access to a manufacturing permit, so they saved a lot of money. And basically, I think the number was about 200,000 vehicles a year. Is that correct?
That is insane. I think so. Yeah. For the first year, that is insane. To give people a reference point, when Rivian with the R1T first came out, I think they manufactured like 15,000 R1Ts in its first year. When Tesla first came out with the Model 3, I think it was around like 30,000 in its first year, 30, 40,000. So being able to manufacture 200,000 units in its first year, which I'm pretty skeptical about, is really impressive.
Yeah.
Why is that the thing in automotive? Overpromise, underdeliver. I do not get that in the automotive world. It's always the case.
Irrespective of country, this is always the case.
Yeah, it's always the case. Everybody does this. Everybody does this.
I think you've got to generate the hype initially, right? I mean, I think I still remember when the Model 3 was announced that it was like the $35,000 EV or something like that. But we are touching on Tesla too much at some point. I'm probably going to be hit with the lawsuit, but...
It's gonna be you, not me, man.
Yeah, jokes apart.
So you hit the nail on the head, though. I mean, Denise, the partnership with Beijing was critical to keep costs down. And one thing I've learned so far in the last couple of years is that the way to convince any kind of buyer is you make it incredibly affordable, and they'll give it a shot. And the Chinese are doing an incredible job of that. Is making products that are incredibly affordable, that are pretty decent. I haven't seen the car. I haven't seen any ratings. I'm really excited to hear what kind of more about your guys' testing and see what you think. But it's incredibly affordable, and this is the big competition that in the United States that we're facing, which is you have a superior product coming in that even with tariffs are going to be pretty decently affordable, and yet it is Chinese, and so can price kind of trump, and I use that term very purposely, the who makes it. So I would not be surprised if I see a few driving around Ann Arbor in the next couple of years. Seriously.
Yeah. That's indeed very correct. And I think now this is probably a good segue into what we were discussing earlier about Harmony OS and Hyper OS and so on.
Yeah.
So what this brings me to question, a little bit is that when you normally think of the term Internet of Things, the first thing that comes to your mind is arguably Alexa, Google Home, and the bulbs and the refrigerators with the displays and so on. Are cars slowly becoming a part of the Internet of Things?
No, because I think that term of Internet of Things is slowly going away.
This is why I was surprised.
Yeah, I don't think. I think Internet of Things was a term because we had to assign something. We had to assign connected devices a meaning. Now it's just ambiguous. Like now it's just expected behavior that our smart devices are somehow connected. Like when I buy a really expensive refrigerator, I know that I'm paying for some sort of internet connectivity. When I buy an oven, I'm sure I can have an option to get it connected to the internet. When I buy a home thermostat, it's somehow connected to the internet. When I buy this TV, it was expected that I was connected to the internet in some way. And so I think the Internet of Things is not really a term anymore, because now that's the expectation with buying any type of large electronic device, is that it is connected to the internet in a way to give us real-time information and purchasing power. I think that is just the expected behavior of any large electronic device. To answer your question, if cars are that or not, no, I think cars are simply just the next medium for accessing real-time information. And in the 1990s, it was your personal computer. It was your desktop computer. Then in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was your laptop. Then in the 2008, 2009, it was the phone. And then that's been like that case for the last decade. Then at the start of kind of 2015, 2016, it was your watch. I think what we're going to see now, starting 2025 and in 2035, 2040, is going to be now our transportation and our mobility devices that are going to be this new medium for conveying real-time information. And so I don't really consider it an Internet of Things. I just consider it just our next medium for accessing real-time information.
That makes sense. And I think the reason why I ask this is because I see other players doing the same thing. Let's look at Google for a quick second, because throughout our discussion, Google has quietly slipped under the radar. Google not just has Android Auto, they have Android Automotive, which is an operating system.
Yes, which are very different, by the way. Yes, that is, for people who are listening to this, those are two very, very different things.
Yeah. And actually, I have had the chance to test a few vehicles with Android Automotive in them. I think it was one of them was a Polestar, one of them was a Volvo XC40 Recharge or something like that.
There's also Google Automotive Services.
Sorry?
There's also Google Automotive Services.
Oh yeah, this was a whole discussion in our episode with Casper about how that is different from Android Automotive, and how third-party makers of operating system can use Google Automotive Services but need not use Android Automotive.
So there's actually three different things that Google's doing that Apple has only done one of these things.
One of these things, yeah.
So there's Android Auto, which is the same thing as Apple CarPlay. You basically plug in an Android phone and it projects a Google interface inside your car where you can access any phone on your app that is compatible. So that's kind of that's their one-to-one comparison. Then there's Android Automotive Services, which is your baseline code that basically is your out-of-box, like very similar to Android when you're creating a smartphone app that car companies can use to then give us like a notification framework or a messaging framework. And then also like it is compatible with systems like QNX to give real-time
it's like Android TV, but for cars.
Like exactly, yep. Then there's Google Automotive Services, which I had the chance to work with a little bit when I was at GM. Ford is now doing this as well as Stellantis and a bunch of other American companies, where it allows you to use Google built apps natively on your car, such as Google Maps, also your kind of native messaging app, your notification platform, but then also kind of their marketplace to get
maybe YouTube Music,
YouTube Music, yeah. So through this, you don't have to connect your phone. You simply just sign in with your account, and it's built in within the vehicle. So so we don't talk about Google enough, and I think Google does a great job to not making a lot of noise. But yes, that is where I see, kind of going back to the conversation about Apple, that's where I see Apple expanding, is that they offer services similar to not Android Auto, but Google Automotive Services, where then you can natively access Apple designed apps inside the car. Same way, like I'm guessing would probably be built with like Swift or something, which is the programming language we use for our cell phones.
I brought this topic up specifically because on one hand you have, on the Chinese side of things, the Harmony OS and HyperOS. On the other part of the world that's not China, you have the Google and the Google services and so on. You now have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. There is Amazon that's venturing into car services now with
Yeah,
the
with
Rivian
Alexa.
with Rivian and Lucid, and I did manage to spend some time in the Lucid as well. And it's not just these newer companies. We had back home a Honda that I could control specific features with through the Alexa at my home, so I can turn on the headlamps, it would turn it on, and sitting at home, So this is what I meant when I say, okay, our cars now becoming a part of this massively connected platform. Will there come a crazy day where you can unlock the doors to your car from your refrigerator screen or something like that?
Moms were going to be happy.
Yeah, true.
I think yes. Well, I mean, that's a natural progression. I think that now, yes, and I think going back to your question about Internet of Things, yes, you're going to see this connection between devices, and which is why I think in some way I'm still that, going back to Denise, your question about was I bummed that Apple killed the car. I am kind of bummed because I would have loved to be able to listen or access what I was watching from my Apple TV on my car and have that kind of sync up perfectly. Because or if I was messaging or communicating with somebody on my cell phone, how I can continue that conversation more, better if I went to an Apple car. So that was the 30% that I was kind of bummed by, because I think Apple does a really good job connecting their devices better than anybody else I've seen. And so, yeah, do I think you're going to be able to control your car through a refrigerator? I'm sure somebody's going to try it, because why not?
Yeah.
But do I think it's going to become kind of this Internet of Things where it's all kind of connected? I think those are more fads. I don't know if I think the real kind of connectivity thing is transmitting our own personal data between devices, and such as, like, for example, in cars, because you have the seat, because you have the seat belt, because you have the steering wheel, the next big data element is going to be biometric data. So because of our wearables, and this is another, I guess, going back to that 30%, why I was kind of bummed that Apple decided to kill it, was that Apple is now very quietly getting into much more health data.
Yep.
And so between the Apple Watch and between your iPhone, now having your car, you can learn so much more about the user, so much more about their health data, and like elevated heart levels, even cholesterol, mobility, like knowing how much you walk, because I know you're in your car, or like knowing how much you drive, you can give so much more better health communication data, because we know exactly basically what you're doing at all times, just through the metadata around you, because we know when you're walking, and we know when you're in your car, and we know when you're sleeping, because they have a sleep app for that too. And so it's the health monitoring, I think the big thing that I would kind of bummed by when Apple gave up the car, because that was kind of their next frontier of knowing what you're doing. So that's kind of, I guess, going back to Denise's question about the Apple, killing the car thing. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, but I mean, you made a good point. And since we're talking about Apple and Apple killing their plan of creating their own car, and we're talking about data, we're talking about health data, metadata, whatever it is. I mean, the biggest thing that they did was moving a lot of people to working on AI, which is, all about data. Now, what I read the other day when I did my research is that that generative AI in the automotive vehicle market has experienced a rapid growth. And I have the numbers here, and it's a forecasted valuation of $20 billion by 2033, which is insane because it's a growth by like 21%. Now, when we were talking about possible topics that we could talk about, AI was one of the big things, because it's just everyone's talking about it. And it was even on German news yesterday, because I think USA is number one, currently working with AI and creating new AI. And then I think Germany was number two, which is surprising, because we're always, why are you looking at me like that?
I still get letters every single day for an email I sent to my insurance
Just
company.
because we use fax machines doesn't mean you cannot be working with
fax
AI.
machines.
Sure.
I don't know.
But yeah, so USA was number one and Germany was number two, because people are actually investing and working so much with AI and on AI now. What's your take on that?
So it's because the overhead is so limited when compared to cars, that it's why it's booming so much and so many different companies can invest in it, because the applications are limitless what you can use it for, yet the overhead cost is very minimal. And so is, by the way, the liability. So this boom of AI, and I don't think it gets talked about enough, is that it is so unregulated in the use of it right now, that companies are desperately trying to moderate themselves when trying to use AI. So it surprised me actually that Germany's leading. I guess my question, do you guys have like any NVIDIA offices that I'm just completely unaware of? Like, do they have like what?
I mean, I don't know what
Maybe
we're doing.
Bosch. I don't know.
Is it
I think Bosch
Bosch?
is investing a lot. Yeah.
Okay. I'd probably see if Volkswagen or Mercedes are doing it too. That'd probably be, but it definitely surprised me that Germany's number 2. But kudos to you guys. That's impressive considering I would have thought the Koreans or the Chinese or the Indians would have been 2.
Yeah,
not
India's
Germany.
not even on the list. I'm sorry, Shrivaas. India's not even on this list.
Did you hear that sound? It's the sound of my heart breaking.
I think China was number 3, and no, it was USA, Germany, Japan, and then China, or the other way around, and then Korea was last, I think, on that list.
I'm surprised the UK or at least England or Great Britain wasn't listed. So that actually was surprising that they're not even listed on there.
Maybe there were 2, but they were very far behind, but I'm not sure.
But also it could be that India comes under US because half the development happens in India, you know. So US accounts for 2 countries. Yeah.
10-15% of my students are Indian, so yeah, there you go. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, Denise. It surprised me that Germany is ranked so high, but it doesn't surprise me that it is moving so rapidly now because the applications are limitless. You can pretty much use it in anything that has any kind of user interface to supplement your interaction, and it's not regulated. And you can do it with a fairly small team compared to something like automotive, where you have to do manufacturing. You have to a pretty enhanced like safety team, and so the overhead costs are exponentially more than doing anything in AI. The AI though in the automotive world, it's been around for a while. Most people don't realize that it's actually been around since almost the beginning of AI. For automotive, it's been used for automotive efficiency, like manufacturing efficiency. It's also been used for like parts ordering, like real-time ordering and supply chains. And then it's also been used for obviously autonomous driving software. And so now what we're seeing is with generative AI and open language models is that we're seeing this now as part of the interface that users can actually interact with it for the first time. And so that's what I'm excited to see in the automotive sector when it comes to AI. But it doesn't surprise me at all that it's moving this rapidly. So yeah. Well, I guess what also surprises me too is that when you talk to somebody who doesn't know anything about AI, the first thing that comes to mind is like Terminator and like the end of the world.
Knight Rider.
Knight Rider.
Knight Rider. Yeah,
Knight Rider. Yeah, Knight Rider. Yep.
Yeah, it's surprising because when I speak to people that know nothing about AI, the first idea of AI is ChatGPT, which kind of makes sense in 2024 when we're speaking about this.
Yep.
But probably a quick question I can ask you then is you made some very interesting points earlier about where else AI was used in the automotive industry. I mean, my best friend, she works for an OEM as well, forecasting in the service side of things. But it really begs the question, where else, generally speaking, do you see AI as such? Let's say when I say AI and people think of ChatGPT, could you give them a little bit more of enlightenment on more specific use cases of AI that is not ChatGPT and not generative AI? Could we go a bit deeper into this?
Yeah. So the first thing that's been used pretty much hand in hand is self-driving technology. So, for example, when you get into an accident, let's say I run a stop sign and I hit somebody, I could potentially make that mistake pretty easily again. Either I'm not paying attention, I'm on my cell phone, whatever. I might make the same mistake twice, 3 times while I'm driving. Once an AI makes a mistake while driving, typically it almost never happens again. And that is a key feature with autonomous driving software, is that AI can remember exactly the scenario or the triggering mechanism of how they got into an accident and has a protocol to follow to avoid that accident. And so what you're seeing with right now, especially with some of this autonomous driving software getting into accidents, is you're not seeing any repetition. So once something happens, great. You don't typically see it happening again. And so that is one of, I think, the best examples that I can think of how autonomous driving is being supported by AI, is that it has nothing to do with, prompt-based or generative AI at all. It's simply the artificial intelligence being able to learn, okay, don't do this again. And that's a very simple thing for an AI to pick up is, okay, in this scenario with these different factors happening, don't do this, don't make this decision again. And it can remember it exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's one way. Another way that most people don't realize too is that AI is also used for the ordering of parts and also predicting when certain models will perform better based on a number of different factors. For example, when interest rates are low, AI has helped product managers being able to tell their manufacturing departments how much of a particular model they want to order. So, for example, if we know that there's a certain number of hurricanes, if we know that there's interest rates are low, chances are people will buy more trucks. And we saw this as a perfect example is where AI actually under-predicted, but still forecasted pretty well what happened with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So when natural disasters typically happen, people like to get more bigger off-roady cars, kind of like that doomsday mentality.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we have enough data to predict that, where we can say, all right, we're going to order more trucks. But when economies are down and interest rates are high, typically people will buy more economy-friendly, budget-oriented vehicles. And so they'll tell the production people, hey, only order this many parts or this many vehicles. And then in addition to that, on the other side of it, if they can predict certain serviceable records of different models, they can then forecast their part suppliers to manufacture more individual parts to then also manufacture. Part of what happened with COVID and the microchip thing is that AIs could not forecast COVID hitting a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
So they only had data accessible within certain countries. They didn't have data accessible to places like Taiwan, where they couldn't tell, they couldn't basically predict that all the part manufacturing was going to happen in Taiwan. So therefore there's a part shortage because AI simply just did not have access to that amount of data. And they also couldn't predict a global pandemic. And so that's kind of why there's a part shortage, is because AI never had to deal with a global pandemic before.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's also, I think, the other reason how AI gets used is forecasting for not only financials, but also like ordering parts, ordering models, and that type of thing.
Well, I think you impressed both the F-150 and Chevy community and the Toyota Prius owners with one statement today.
Thank you. Very kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
What's also really scary too is that AI can also predict marketing and sales, and that's where it gets a little bit scary. And this is so what there's a famous scene. Well, it's not just to say famous scene, but it's a scene in the movie, in the Steve Jobs movie by Aaron Sorkin, where Kate Winslet's character was talking with the Steve Jobs, character, and he said it was the first introduction of the Macintosh, where he said that marketing will basically, predict this many sales, and it's not going to perform very well. But then when the iMac came out and that kind of last third of the movie came out, they said they're going to sell 1 million units in the first quarter. That was predicted with the help of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So that forecasting, it's very, very basic AI, mind you. That was back in the early 90s. But that was an early version of AI that can make those market estimates as the number of units you're going to sell of a particular product before they even sold a single unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also for sales forecasting, so that they can say, okay, how much money we want to put into marketing, or how much money we want to do that kind of thing too. So, I think people think that AI has only been around for the last, since ChatGPT and OpenAI was created. No, it's been involved for decades. I mean, this is why, the big tech companies have AI researchers. This is why at the University of Michigan, we have not one, but like 10 different tenure track faculty working on different types of AI and the use of it. So, it's been around for a long time, and it's used in very different aspects. I mean, heck, even our business school has, I think, people studying AI and management decisions and stuff like that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I do think that when AI, or when someone talks about AI, in most cases, at least in Germany, I would assume it's about autonomous driving, because it's just such a prominent type of topic.
Yeah.
But that's also probably a cultural thing. But I do believe that people don't necessarily trust robots or automated machines or whatever it may be. I think there is a huge problem with that still. And the question that we were talking about earlier is that if you were to say that that those AI systems were to mitigate or to prevent human errors when driving, because that's kind of what they're made for, but they were basically invented and implemented by humans in the first place, do they really, or does it really fully mitigate human errors? Is that possible when it was made by humans in the first place?
Well, then you're getting back to the Turing theory. And, is an AI truly AI if it was created by an imperfect being, basically, is the kind of theory behind it. And that's kind of some underlying talks around, Turing and, which he originally talked about, which is not discussed enough in the movie, by the way. So for those who don't know, Alan Turing, he created the first form of the computer back in World War II. He was played by Benedict Cumberbatch in the Imitation Game. And Turing theory and going to get into that kind of philosophy is AI, can AI truly be, perfect if it was created by humans who are imperfect? And so I think it's a better version of ourselves. And what it can do is it can learn much more quickly than we can. And so I think this is where the perfection really comes out is humans' inability to be perfect learners, whereas an AI can remember, perfectly. And I think that's where I would place the perfection statement, is that AI is never going to be as a whole perfect, but it can learn and it can remember perfectly. And so that's where I think the benefit is. And that's what I would tell anybody who's trying to think of autonomous vehicles is anything that can happen will happen. And eventually we're going to address everything that can happen. And therefore AI will remember. And so that's and it's like kind of going back to like Murphy's Law, anything that can happen will happen. But with AI, at least if we do it enough, if this is why it's so important to do real world testing, is because I want to get into those accidents now. I want to just rip off that Band-Aid. No, I'm serious.
No, I just saw the thumbs up come up and you said, I want to get into those accidents now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There you go. And so I want AI to get into those smaller accidents so that everybody can share that data. And so that on a larger population scale, those accidents don't happen then. Because if we don't do it now, and if we don't learn that now, it's going to happen eventually, but on a much larger scale, meaning more people might get hurt. And so I'd rather make those mistakes now in the safest environment I can think of. But to get the data we need to do real world testing. That's why companies like, Waymo, why, Cruise here in Ann Arbor, May Mobility are doing street testing. They're just trying to do it in the safest way possible which is in kind of controlled city environments to get that data. And unfortunately, accidents will happen. I mean, if anything, doing anything innovative, there is going to be a little bit of risk. And I think that's what I would prefer happening is get you slowly increase the amount of risk, knowing that bad stuff will happen. But as long as you do it slowly, you can mitigate that risk as much as possible and avoid catastrophic mistakes or catastrophic instances like what happened with Cruise, unfortunately, where it unfortunately dragged an individual after it got hit. And I think they did a really good job responding to that. But at the same time, stuff like that, unfortunately, I think was bound to happen. Not with Cruise, but just in general with the autonomous vehicle industry, because that's the stuff we just don't think of.
But isn't that kind of a unique problem for AI? It does lack this social interaction part that humans have, or this intuitive part of their mind that humans have to prevent certain situations from happening in the first place.
You're right.
Is that something that you can also teach AI at some point? Because you said, sometimes we have to work with smaller accidents so we can feed this information to the AI. But in a lot of cases, these wouldn't even have happened because you have people in your car that would have prevented that from happening with their intuitive reaction, maybe.
Well, so let me kind of do the double-edged coin for a second, because you're absolutely right. AI doesn't know what it doesn't know. Just like humans, we don't know what we don't know. And, going back to quoting the Apollo 1 incident where 3 astronauts died, not even during a launch test. It was simply just an unplugged test. It was because we simply didn't think it could happen. And that was the root cause of why those astronauts died. Back in 1967, I think. And I think with this, you're right. AI is technically flawed because we think that certain scenarios will happen and we don't know what we don't know. And so we have to code it. However, I'd much rather have that and a system that can learn it with 100% memory than a human user who makes the same mistake but doesn't necessarily remember it across everybody, because when we make a mistake, we only remember it. If you get into an accident, you'll remember the mistake that you made. But I don't have your memory. I can't share that memory. With an AI, it's a shared collective. And so when one vehicle makes a mistake, that code gets shared across the entire ecosystem of whatever's sharing that open language model or that AI model. So when one cruise vehicle makes a mistake, every cruise vehicle can learn from it. When one Waymo vehicle makes a mistake, every Waymo vehicle can learn from it, as opposed to if you make a mistake while driving, only you remember it. And so that's kind of what I would say to that is you're right. Fundamentally is ethically a little bit flawed because it only can learn from what we encode in it and what it can learn itself. But the difference is that you're a mind of one, I'm a mind of one, but AI is a shared mind and a shared memory that's as 100% recollection, which humans don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, what would you say if we're talking about AI still being flawed and AI developing and being improved? What are fundamental challenges that we're going to face working with AI or developing AI further?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing when it's adoption. It only can be successful if people trust it and actually try it. So it has to build trust. It has to build that kind of that usage. Eventually, Waymo's going to have to make money. Eventually, Cruise is going to have to make money, and that's going to rely on users actually using it. So trust is going to be paramount to that when trying to kind of use these vehicles because it has to eventually make money. That's going to be I think the biggest thing is trust and usage and actual users. In order to get there, which is the second problem, is going to be performance. Right now, we're at level 3, level 4 within fixed areas. So trying to map out certain areas and get that usage going is going to be key because people want to use it for longer and longer distances, not just, going within a certain, I would say 20 or 30 square mile area. They want to be able to take it to the airport and back. They want to be able to take it to work as a commuting tool. And that's going to require more mapping and much more learning on the chance of AI. So that's going to be kind of increasing that mapping area is going to be the next problem. The third problem is time. And it's also, I kind of complement time with patience. This stuff is going to take time. And unfortunately, because of Hollywood, because of people like Elon Musk, people want it now. People want this technology immediately. And I can't, as a designer and as people who've worked with engineers, I have to tell people to be patient, and nobody's patient when it comes to this. They are so anxious to kind of create a YouTube video where they can monetize it and say, oh, look at me, I'm in a Tesla, my hands are off, I'm going to go take a nap in the back seat. That
makes so much sense. I think we've discussed this at some point, but go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. And so the third thing is just patience, and people don't have patience. They want this thing now. They want to be able to invest in it. They want to get it early. They want to see it kind of going, and people want everything now. And for something that's this innovative, that has the potential to really reshape how we kind of move as a human race, it's going to take a long time, especially if you want to do it the right way. And so I think those are the three challenges. And that's where I see it kind of, just some immediate challenges, with trust, and that kind of thing. And then obviously, mapping and increasing mapping. But then lastly, it's patience. The fourth thing that I think is kind of obvious is talent. And this is where it hits pretty close to home because of what I do for a living as a teacher at the University of Michigan. More people need to understand engineering and need to understand ethics and need to understand philosophy, not just user interface design, not just coding. They need to get a big picture, because what happens and what we're seeing now is that you see things like data privacy, you see things like data security and cybersecurity, and you also see things that deal with philosophy, such as when to use certain terms and when not to. And so I think talent with a diversified mind is incredibly hard to get. And companies, to your joke earlier, I mean, Shrivaas, you said, in India, half of, maybe it's 2 countries because all Indian developers in the United States.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. It's because people can't find enough talent to create these things. And so that's also a burden, is relying on people with enough not just natural talent, but educated talent to develop these technologies. we're not going to be able to get enough of it because it's hard. It's really hard because you're asking the same type of person to both understand the engineering, to understand the design philosophies, but then also be able to articulate that in a way that's understandable and convincing. And it's really hard to educate that type of person in all three of those areas.
I mean, just for that last point, I would like to ask our imaginary audience to really give a standing ovation, because I don't think anybody has ever mentioned or thought of that before.
Seriously?
Do you want me to?
I'll take an Ohio State fan, clapping a Michigan fan any day. So if you want to do that, I'll take it.
I cannot.
I mean, before we move forward, I think probably I have one question to touch on in terms of trust, and I want to speak a little bit from personal experience here. I was driving a car in the US, Honda CRV, which had
very
both,
popular.
Yeah, which had this particular one had the lane assist and the steering assist. And I was going down some highway or freeway, as you guys call it, at around 45 miles an hour, and the freeway eventually started to turn, but not a sharp turn, but it turned. And then at that speed, which 45 doesn't sound much in kilometers an hour, but in miles an hour, it's quite a bit. The car took the turn as well, and I was genuinely at that point in time shitting my pants. And this was, sorry for the expletives, maybe Tom will cut it out or blur it out.
No, we're going to leave it in.
Because I had never experienced this before. And honestly, after the speed at which it took that turn, because it's also a huge car, I did not trust that system again. But this is me speaking from experience. This is me speaking also as a human factors researcher, as a user experience guy. If it's going to be, let's say, and I would say the same for a lot of my friends who've tried these things. I've also tried other automated driving softwares, which I find generally a little bit hard to trust. In your view, and from a perspective of human factors user experience, how do you really convince people to try these things out? Because you spoke about adoption. I bring this up because when you say that, this autopilot, there is Super Cruise, Blue Cruise, whatever it is, everyone's going to try it out eventually because they're going to be like, oh, this is very cool. But that novelty factor is going to wear off at some point, and then it's going to become a very crucial day-to-day safety mechanism as well, right? So in your view, how do you really convince people to adopt more and more?
So you actually kind of hit on one of the things I was going to say, which is fun. You got to make it enjoyable and fun, and that's not just a marketing thing, but you have to kind of make it enticing in the first place for people to want to try it. To continually try to use it, it kind of goes back to the trust thing. You have to continually make the user aware that we're making it better. And so I think one of the big things that car companies need to be able to do is over-the-air updates. They need to always, just like, because they're conditioned with their phone. Their phone you get security stuff, you get improvements constantly. And so everybody globally has the mental model that their technology gets better over time through over-the-air. Their software gets better over time through over-the-air updates. You need to do the same thing with cars. You need to remind the user all the time that we're making this better. So even if it is cool the first time and it works perfectly, eventually, you're right, the novelty is going to wear off. It's going to be okay. If you tell the user we're making this better, they're going to want to try it out again and again and again, and eventually it creates a habit that they then will use it all the time. But you have to remind the customer that, hey, we're making this better, or try this new feature, or hey, now we can go, on streets and not, normal streets and not just highways. And then they're great. Oh, I'll try it now. I'll try it in streets now. And so you're going to have to create that repetitive behavior to form a habit. And the way you do that is to remind them to do that. Pavlov's dog, the bing, the sound, you need to over-the-air updates so that it acts like a bell to their, native behavior to want to try it again. So you're forming habit mechanism, your conditioning mechanism, or your trigger, your bell equivalent, doing the whole Pavlov's dog thing, is over-the-air updates. It's reminding the customer to try something again with that same feature, to try, hey, we got street views now. Oh no, now you can try it in, these highways now. You can, now you can completely leave your hands off for a longer period of time. Now you can take your eyes off the road for a longer period of time. It's going to eventually form a habit where the users can use it on a regular basis. And so that's why I think is key, is over-the-air updates.
We were talking about trust, or you were talking about trusting a system earlier, and also trusting AI. Now, since AI is a learning system, it's constantly learning. And I've came across this term, which is called AI hallucination, which basically means something like you feed the system wrong information, whether that's on purpose or because you didn't know any better. And then you may get a wrong output, which could end in a dangerous situation. How do you make sure that doesn't happen, or how do you prevent that from happening in the first place?
I didn't know that term existed, and it
I didn't know
brings
the
to my
term.
mind. Do you know
I
this?
just made it up, probably. No, I read it.
Wait. Repeat the term again. Wait. Let me just.
AI hallucination. I read this in an article, and that was.
I will have to look this up because I teach a class in generative AI, and I
hope it's right now.
No. I will look it up. It doesn't surprise
please.
me. So because again, going back to your point, we're humans. We're going to feed them even our mistakes that we may think is right in the moment, but is in fact wrong, because this will happen. And sure, it has happened already, where we'll think we're giving it certain protocols or data that we think is accurate, but then in fact is incorrect. I mean, if you look at like open, language models right now with generative AI can't tell the difference between fact and fiction. It simply just scans the data that it has available and then spits it out based on what it thinks is the collective argument for, or the collective data for a certain type of subject.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say the same thing applies to vehicles and AI, where if enough people in that data set are telling them one thing, even though it's false, but everybody's screaming the same lie, or the majority of the people are screaming the same lie, it's going to think that that lie is in fact truth, because it simply can't tell the difference between a truth and a lie. It just looks at the largest data set. So this is why it's so important for not just individuals, but for the collective to feed it accurate information, because if more people give it the accurate information, it'll think that that is correct. The other end of this coin is censorship, which this is where it gets into a bit of an ethical dilemma, where we will tell the AI to completely ignore an entire data set because we don't feel comfortable that it can be used in an ethical way, or in a safe way in this case. So in AI, if certain developers know that, hey, we can't necessarily trust this data set, or we don't believe it's necessarily safe or accurate, they can tell it to ignore it. And this is basically censorship. And I think this is where if you don't do that, then things like going into the back of ambulances or fire trucks repeatedly can happen, because you're telling the AI to ignore that whole data set. And so I think so this is where censorship can be necessarily a bad thing, because if you're telling AI to ignore a complete data set, it can't remember because it's being told to ignore it. So I think the way to prevent hallucinations like that from occurring is to have more people feed AI data, but at the same time using censorship very sparingly, where you're still able to let the AI learn from itself, but at the same time you're not censoring too much, because if you're censoring too much, they're not going to learn anything and nothing's going to get shared.
True.
So yeah, that's what I think.
I think at some level this kind of starts to go into the direction of a very common thing that's said about AI. AI is going to steal everyone's jobs. And now we're seeing AI do, and honestly, this to me is a little bit worrying, that a lot of people are using AI to conduct things like UX research or UX design and so on. I mean, of course, it can be a very helpful tool if you want to analyze data, for example. But if I say, hey, generate questions for me, then, this is a different argument, right? So how can we make sure that AI doesn't become a threat to, I'm not going to say the jobs, right, but to UX designers and UX researchers as such? Because it is possible that people believe that the job this person does can be done by AI, but really there is a very special difference, right?
There is, and this is actually, I teach a class exactly on this. It's generative AI and UX. That's really the title of my class at U of M. So what I tell my students is that this is just like anything else that's innovative. It's not going to replace your jobs. It's simply the evolution of the job itself.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that as a UX designer, you need to know how to use these tools more effectively to complement your existing job.
Exactly.
It's gonna replace the jobs of people that didn't know enough about or didn't educate themselves on how to make their job better.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those jobs may go away, but now it's just on you to understand the new technology, so you can kind of so you can know how to use it effectively. there are definitely limits to these tools, like even with UX. For example, generative AI has a very hard time displaying text within images, and also to do group kind of realistic photos, or to give group estimations of how visualization needs to happen, because it's going to assume that those individuals are related. I asked, like, right now I'm giving a lecture tomorrow actually on the ethics around generative AI and photos, and how we can use that in our designs. And so, because a lot of the times when we want to make a design, we have photos to have to go along with it. It's kind of tells a much better story with that way when you're presenting a design idea. And so one of the ethical things that's a problem is that AIs, when you're asking for certain group photos or that type of thing, it has a very difficult time showing disassociated individuals. So when I put in a statement like, show me a picture of a group of students on campus, it'll pretty much for the most part give everybody the same hair color and maybe even the same eye color.
Someone has 13 fingers.
Exactly. Or somebody has 13 fingers. And so like it has a very hard time doing this. And it very much leaves out the natural human like imperfections that we often see in these pictures, to the point where it's almost noticeable. The other thing too is when it creates like high fidelity user interface designs, it has a very hard time incorporating both traditional UX methodologies like drop downs, checkboxes, accordions, along with text, that combination of the two. And so it's a great starting point, but then you can just finish it. So it kind of gives it inspiration. It's AI is a great way to get rid of a blank page or a blank canvas, because you can just pick up where it left off.
Yeah. And
so, but after you get past that blank canvas and you get something to kind of manipulate, then you can hit the ground running as your normal UX designer. So that's where I see it kind of replacing it, or kind of replacing jobs where the UXer was only meant to kind of refine something or not do as much kind of, final deliverable or creation or collaboration with an engineer. Also, too, AI necessarily can't collaborate with a developer to build the product.
True.
Like it's not like it's a symbiotic being that's kind of sitting there right next to you, then designing it and sitting next to a developer trying to code and make something and making those real-time decisions to make it better. Also, AI doesn't have a preference. They don't have an opinion in the same way that designers do, where like your CEO, and like in the previous conversation, you were telling me your CEO is a very visual person. He has a visual mind, an aesthetic in mind. AIs don't have that. They don't have an opinion where you want something to look a certain way. It'll just output something that it's told to stick with. And then the drop of a hat, when you want something to look like something else, look at more skeuomorphic versus minimalist. It'll then just change it. But sticking with something, saying, no, this is my vision. This is how I want it to kind of operate and feel. It can be easily distracted based on some other prompt language you use. And so trying to get a unified vision with several different teams is still a very humanistic thing to do, because it's based on our ego. It's based on our opinion to kind of get behind a design idea. And so that's where I see the future of UX designers doing is I encourage all my students, especially international, my female students, have an opinion. Like, no, this is my vision. This is how I want something to be like, because I think this is either better for the customer or fits better with our aesthetic as a company or whatever. And that's where AI tools don't do a very good job. So yeah, that's kind of my impression as the future of jobs, is that it's just like any other new technology. Your job is just evolving. Your job, you just now have to learn how to use these new tools more effectively to do your job, whereas in the past you didn't have to. That's the case for every job. Salesmen had to be able to learn how to use the internet more effectively. Well, they did it, and they're not replaced. Same thing with realtors. In the 1950s, realtors and real estate, they've been around since the last 60, 70, 80 years. Then the internet came on in the 90s. They pivoted. They had to use it more effectively. And so that's something that you're just going to have to learn with the job, and it now just becomes synonymous with what you're doing. So yeah.
Now, of all the things that we talked about when it comes to AI, we talked mostly about autonomous driving first and foremost, but how can we personalize the in-vehicle interaction or the use experience by using AI? What else is there except for autonomous driving? Because I think a lot of people when they use their car, they want to see more AI. For example, I don't know, voice assist or chat GPT, which was implemented by some of the OEMs in Germany. I think Mercedes,
Volkswagen, yeah.
Yep. So, okay, so talking about AI now is kind of like what you're interacting with in the vehicle. I think voice is going to be the easy one to try to implement because ChatGPT can translate very easily to voice. Because instead of seeing the language that gets in your prompt, you can now hear it, and you can talk back to it. That's the first thing I think it's going to come. It's very much, I think, what I cannot think of a better movie that had more influence on the UX community and the automotive UX community than Iron Man. And because of that, and because of the voice assistant that, Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. had, kind of conditioned us thinking, oh, I want that. I want that so badly. I want this like personal assistant. And so I think they're going to see that pretty much as an option in every luxury vehicle in the next 10 years as a sort of AI-based voice assistant. And Jarvis is the name of the voice assistant in the movie for anybody who was curious. And so you're going to hear this kind of very British accent type of voice helping you along your journey as whenever you're driving. And just because it could be Michael Caine. I can't remember the guy. What is the guy who played Jarvis in Iron Man? I can't remember his name. But you're going to hear this. That's the thing that's going to be, I think, very ubiquitous across all major luxury brands is an AI-based voice assistant. The next thing I think is going to be predictive behavior based on what situation and when you're driving. So based on location, based on user preference, you're going to see things where the interface will ask you if you want to do stuff while you're driving in a very, almost like your turn-by-turn direction. So think of it like when you're using Google Maps, it says, hey, this new route available. Would you like to take this? Would you like to take this new route? You're going to see those types of messages appear for other things in your vehicle, such as, hey, your daughter just sent you a text message that she's ready to be picked up. Would you like new directions to your school? Or would you like us to order something at the closest Starbucks for you? Because they know that your daughter always likes to get Starbucks after you get picked up at school. So it can start connecting those types of things. It'll ask you, hey, the weather's getting really bad. Would you like directions to divert the weather pattern that's happening? So not just traffic, but also predictive weather patterns that the AI can then sense that are around you. So instead of going through, a certain way, it can now kind of divert you around the storm potentially, which I know sounds kind of crazy for people in Europe or Asia where you guys don't drive as much as in America. But in America, my commute, I used to drive an hour and a half to work. And that was every day. So there, an hour and a half, back an hour and a half. That was actually not that unnormal. Like that's a lot of people in the United States do that. So or like if you're taking a road trip, like every summer, my girlfriend and I, we drive up north. There could be a storm that comes through during a drive up and they may recommend a different path. So that's another thing too. And this is what my marketing friends will definitely do. Hey, Costco is offering a new buy 4 get 5 free.
That's every German lady.
They will burn my car on fire, man.
Yep. That's gonna happen. Where we're totally gonna open that up to marketing messages that come in saying, hey, Starbucks just debuted the new Red Cup sale. Would you like us to get? I mean, you're gonna get these marketing messages that come in where you're gonna get something tailored for you, where you can buy it in real time because it knows your user preferences. It knows that you like this, and it's gonna understand you a lot more. Because not only can the AI know more about what's happening around your vehicle, it'll know more about you. So you're gonna see, like I promise you, OpenAI is gonna do this, where they're gonna embed their AI has an option as an app in your vehicle as well as on your phone. And so if you start asking enough things, it'll understand your product preferences. For example, I swear to God, if this happens, it'll kill my girlfriend. But Target is introducing a new Stanley mug. It's available right now. The big ones.
Oh yeah.
It's available right now at the Target. Would you like me to divert you to the Target to get one real quick? That, I promise you, the real-time sales, like these flash sale things, that will happen because it knows that you're a big fan of a certain product and it'll get it for you. And you don't have to actually be there in person. And so, especially when you have to go pick up things or that kind of thing, like that's going to happen because what Instagram has taught us is that if you have enough tailored ads, you'll buy stuff enough.
Yeah.
And so I promise you the same thing will happen with your voice and your voice assistant.
I mean, I'm already creeped out by things on Instagram at the times where I've spoken about things with my friends and I see ads for it. I'm like, holy mother of Jesus, that should not be there.
Yep.
But a couple of things, maybe it brings a very funny incident to mind when you talk about AI, OpenAI integrating, ChatGPT. I don't know if you guys know the story. There was this car dealership in the US that integrated ChatGPT, the premium version, into their virtual support agent on their website, and people discovered that they could simply, the functionality of this was not just restricted to being a support agent, but you could get free access to premium chat GPT by using this thing. So they really gamed the system over there. And I mean, it's not too much related to what we're talking, but I was reminded of this really funny thing, and they were just like, okay, what is that? I don't know. I'm not going to name brands, but it was a dealership of one American brand, and they were like, what's the best car with the best gas mileage, and is recommending something from another brand. It was genuinely one of the funniest things I saw. But I think at some point in time, if this thing comes up, where it's like, do you want to get a Starbucks coffee on the way back home? I would be the happiest person on that day, because this is exactly the premise of my research. This is exactly what I've published in terms of personalized recommendations driven by AI. So
specifically Starbucks.
I chose to not name brands over there and stick with an Italian restaurant, but the concept is the same. So I would be really happy to see that.
I mean, the problem is that people want it. I mean, like Denise, like if you could have an assistant that you can talk to, here's a good example that I could really see happening. Truck drivers are a good example of this. I remember kind of doing a feature where we're trying to combat sleep apnea and falling asleep at the wheel. If you have an AI that can talk to you and have a conversation back and forth while you're driving, that is incredibly powerful for so many people as you're driving, because that is much more effective at keeping you awake than trying to listen to something where it's a one-way conversation. Sure. It's a one-way thing. And so I know I'm kind of being kind of funny with the whole marketing thing, but if you can imagine AI now being used for natural language to have honest conversations, you're going to see things like therapy sessions being conducted inside the vehicle. I'm not kidding. Like therapy sessions, medical feedback, trying to do research on any kind of topic you can think of while just talking back and forth with an AI while you're driving. The ability to facilitate a natural language model inside the car where it is entirely safe to have a conversation with AI. You can learn things. You can get like language lessons as you're driving. Like you can learn a second language. You can write a paper by just simply speaking into something, and the AI will record it for you and save it as in your Google Drive. You can also compose and be creative and actually write a paper or write a piece of music or that type of thing. If Justin Bieber has taught us anything, is that you can just go bum bum ba dum ba dum bum, and that'll come up as a song, and like you can actually compose music. So I think what we'll start seeing is this ability of just through like talking and just through this two-way conversation, that you can be truly creative and get services that in the past were not available for people who are by themselves in the vehicle, which makes up the vast majority of drivers in most countries. And so I think that's what I'm most excited for, is seeing this ability to have AI really improve people's lives when they're behind the wheel. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm excited for.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Maybe one question I have touching on this topic is, I read this very interesting research at some point in time in my academic journey that a voice assistant causes just as much cognitive load as using a touchscreen when driving.
Yes.
And we all know that cognitive overload reduces driver attention, right? So the more and more and more and more we add to these voice assistant, I suspect the more and more there's going to be an increase on cognitive load, maybe even leading to cognitive overload at some point in time. How do we mitigate this?
So it's a mitigation I think we have to be comfortable with, because it's the same thing of having a conversation with a person, but you're using kind of like your existing phone app in the vehicle where it's hands-free. Right now, pretty much everybody globally is totally fine involving a phone in the car. So you can just talk to having a conversation, just like we are right now. you're right in that the cognitive load can increase when trying to do something with voice, but because AI can have natural language responses, just like a human being can, it'll, in my mind, reduce some of that cognitive load. But I think that a lot of tech companies will say, but it's the same thing as having a conversation with, with an individual. What's the difference? I think the cognitive load will actually go down. I think the reason why it's increased right now is because people feel the need to having to repeat what they're saying. People with strong accents, speech impediments, that's where the cognitive load increases, because they have to be much more aware of what they're saying so that the system can pick up on the nuances of how they're saying it. As AI gets better, because again, AI can learn from you. It can learn how you say the word "the" or "thank you" or "yes" or "no." It can then process that understanding faster, and then therefore decrease the cognitive load as you're talking with it. So I think that's, yes, it is kind of high right now, but that's because AI systems and voice interaction systems suck and don't have AI right now. But I think once the AI starts getting better and learns from you, that cognitive will actually go down. So again, going back to my earlier statement, you got to just do it more. You need more users. You need more data to learn from it.
Yeah. Maybe we're coming to the end of the podcast, so maybe we can end with one final question.
Yeah, but I'm guessing it will be podcast number 3, because there's still a lot to talk about, I feel.
Wait. So I got to ask Denise a question. I got to change the topic slightly. Okay, what's your prediction for the football season this year? I got to know. I got to know.
You keep asking me those mean questions because I'm going to say we're going to win, and then we're going to end up losing. Because all my American friends are going to hate me.
It's worked so far for me, so I can't complain.
I was going to ask you, my final question would have been, do you want me to send you my Ohio State sweatshirt for Christmas, or do you want it to be Easter break? I mean, I might swing by, drop it off.
I think I just smelled a burn somewhere. I know nothing about American football.
So
I'm hoping for us to win, but I mean, now that your coach, you mentioned one coach, he switched to our team, and then another one switched to yours.
No. So our head coach, so his name is Jim Harbaugh. He was a very famous NFL player who became a head coach. He actually went back to the NFL to become a head coach, and so he left, and one of his assistants was promoted, and then one of Ohio State's assistants was then recruited after the season, because their spring training is going on right now. After training had already started, and was poached kind of like right in the middle of training to come to Michigan, which is ridiculous. That's kind of unheard of. So kind of instilled the rivalry. But Shrivaas, just to kind of paint a picture, this is how big this rivalry is. I'm not this is how crazy it is.
You cannot fathom.
You cannot fathom. Okay, what is the largest stadium in Germany? Like the football, whatever, doesn't matter. What is the largest? Dortmund. Yeah,
not even. It's not.
How many people are in that stadium?
I think 90 with all the seats. Yeah, about 90. I think that must be the biggest. Yeah.
Okay, so Michigan Stadium has at its the last Ohio State game had 115,000. A university, a publicly funded university that is a nonprofit that has students, was able to fit 115,000 people in a stadium, which is bigger than any NFL stadium, by the way. Ohio State is right behind it with like 105,000.
Are you sure it's less? I'm gonna look it up.
It's less. Michigan's bigger, but not by much. That's it. No, sorry. This is not So, okay, here's another cool statistic. Michigan Ohio State was the second most watched game in all of college football, behind the national championship. So that's what's crazy, is that it was the most watched game in all of college football, and the highest ratings, which is pretty crazy. I think it was like 20 million people watched it for the entire duration of like 3 hours, which is incredibly, like, a long time for that many people to be captivated by that. But yeah, it was pretty unbelievable.
For university, when you say university, then I'm obviously very shocked, right?
Yes.
If outside of a university, maybe these numbers are not really impressive in the sense that, but when you say, okay, there's a public university, like, oh my God, that's a lot of people.
This is a nonprofit. This is not a company. This is a university that has students. The players are students. I had 2 students on the football team.
Wonderful.
That had to go to class the Monday after they played. So yeah, these are 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are just now starting to get paid, but only through endorsements. So they don't get a salary. Yet they generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for TV deals and that kind of thing. So yes, it's a very weird, very American thing. And Michigan versus Ohio State is by far the biggest rivalry in college football sports. And it just keeps on getting better and better with all this drama and that kind of thing too. So it just makes it that much more better. So, but yeah, it's very, very cool.
Just imagine one of those games, just for example, Ohio State and University of Michigan, you would have, that would be the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe a soccer World Cup game in Germany. And this is like one game, you know, and soccer World Cup would be 4 weeks of games just back to back. And this is one game and everyone goes crazy.
Yep.
People can be quite passionate indeed.
No, it's if you guys ever have a chance to come to the States, just go to if you can, go to an American football game. It's tailgate, drink beer,
exactly,
all that good stuff. It's a really good time.
I'm assigning that responsibility to you.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you guys come to campus, we'll plan it so it's during a football weekend. You guys can experience.
So we're going to take him up on that, right?
Yeah, I will wear my Ohio State sweatshirt.
No, if you guys come, I will ask the school to give you guys tickets.
That sounds like
a plan.
Nice.
No.
We're in.
We have that on record, by the way. So.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you can quote me on it later. Yeah, you can.
It's like a contract at this point.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, Jim, it was great to have you again, and I think we're up for a third time. I mean, that's just us. Maybe you were too. Who knows?
I'm in.
I am in too. I mean, I had such a wonderful time. I think you brought out so many points that people would not normally have thought of. So, really had a great time speaking with you.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You have a great day. I think it's what time is it? 12:30.
It's 12:30.
Yeah,
midday.
So it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
Nice.
Lunchtime for us. Yeah.
Well, we'll speak to you soon, and enjoy your day.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.